I'm Andrew Pedersen. I've been in the industry for about 25 years, 10 of which was spent at EA working on the Pogo business, arguably one of the first places to really introduce social casino games. After that, I had a stint at GSN Games, where I was...
Wait a minute.
What?
You can't remove that one social network that you were at for a year.
Which one?
The one with kind of the semi...
Tagged?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I was at Tag doing games for about a year and a half. And then sort of most recently was at GSN Games, where I was head of studios, running and operating the GSN casino product, as well as GSN Grand Casino, worked with Sony Pictures on Wheel of Fortune, as well as Deal or No Deal and a bunch of other brands. So that's sort of my connection to sort of the social casino space.
Dave Bezahler, president of Golden Rat Studios. We're a Los Angeles-based social game studio that's primarily owned by a very large resort and entertainment company in Asia. And we create social casino games or game-like experiences that are primarily geared for Asia.
My name is Niko Vuori. Got into games with Zynga back in the good old days, Facebook Canvas, and then was GM of Zynga Poker until I left in 2013 to co-found a social slots company called Rocket Games. We were probably best known for our market-leading classic-style slots game, mechanical three-reel type gameplay, which is popular in North America. And we were acquired, I still say we because I'm not actually there anymore, but Rocket was acquired by Penn National Gaming, which is a big regional casino operator, in 2016. And I've been kind of advising companies since leaving after the acquisition.
Hi, I'm Jay Sarno. I'm the head of UA and marketing creative at Product Madness, social casino company acquired by Aristocrat at 2012. I've been in the industry for 14 years, 7 of which was performance marketing.
Before I do this, let's get a sense of who we're talking to. How many of you would consider yourself to be very experienced in social casino? Okay, and how many of you would consider yourselves to be really completely kind of unknown and super new in the social casino area? Okay, so I'm not. Which I don't know which one of you, Andrew's probably as good as probably super for this. You want to just quickly define social casino so that we're all on the same page?
For the one person in the room that raised their hand?
For the one person in the room that raised their hand. And then the 4 that should have raised their hand because they didn't want to admit it.
Can't I just have a private conversation with them after and not waste everybody's time?
You could. You could have defined it in that period of time.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's essentially cash in, no cash out. There's no consideration. It's viewed as entertainment, not as gambling, though it certainly scratches the same itch that gamblers are looking for.
I think that's perfect. Everybody agree with that? Cool. Okay, so there's been a lot of social casino games. There's been even more social casino companies. We got a couple of really big guys out in the field, and Playtika and GSN and Zynga Poker and probably some other guys equally big. It seems like a really crowded space to me. So I wonder if each of you could comment on, is there room for more games? Is there room for more companies? What would they need to do to be different, if you think that's important? Or would they just be more of the same old social casino? Want to start all the way down at the end?
Yeah, sure. I think in my opinion, there's plenty of room left. I mean, it's a $4 billion industry, so I think it's definitely mature, but there's definitely room for innovation. So whether it be metagames, micro features, anything else, or perceived scale, integrations like that will definitely bring upon like a new breed of games.
I think it was a good question, two-part question there. So are there room for more games? I think absolutely there are room for more games. Casino players, and I'm coming mostly from a slots perspective here, because that's about 2/3 of the social casino revenues are in slots. Slots players are hungry for more content. They're always looking for great content. They're looking for realistic content. They're looking for realistic odds. But they're also looking for variety. So that's why there has been so much success in the social casino space, especially with slots over the years. Now, having said that, is there room for more companies? I think that's the more challenging question, because most of the companies out there have multiple games in their portfolio. A couple of years ago, there were still companies who only had a single product in their portfolio, most notably probably IGT with Double Down, which of course was acquired by W not too long ago. But most of the companies out there have come around to the multi-product portfolio approach, where they realize that they need to produce a lot of different types of games, a lot of different kinds of content for their players. And that has resulted in a lot of learnings, a lot of entrenchment, a lot of locking down of your player base, rewards programs, all kinds of innovations that my colleague here on the panel is referring to, that is very difficult to replicate as table stakes for a new company to produce a game that would actually be successful in market. So that's my perspective. I think there are still some exceptions. Maybe we'll get to those later on. But I think there's room for more games, and there will be more games. Don't know if there's that much more room for new companies.
I think if you put this in context, we are entertainment companies. And if you look at this as entertainment, there is always room for more entertainment and better entertainment, and players have a voracious appetite for anything new. So I actually think new games have an advantage. I do agree that the reality of user acquisition and just experience in this particular genre does make it more difficult for new companies to kind of break into this space, but I think we'll get into that in much more detail as we go forward.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what the other panelists are saying. What we had seen data-wise is social casino players are typically playing 2+ games at any time, so there's always an interest in trying something new. So I think there's the opportunity to introduce something new to the market, but in terms of unseating some of the really entrenched competitors that are sitting at the top of the leaderboard, I think is something that's probably insurmountable, but it doesn't mean that you can't have a healthy little business. It doesn't mean that you can ultimately be acquired by one of these larger companies. But I think it's a tough road to hoe.
Some company that you're familiar with has kind of had some ups and downs in terms of the last couple of years. What drives that? Why do you kind of have a banner year one year and the next year that's kind of a little less than a banner year?
You're referring to GSN?
I am.
Okay. I think part of it has to do with investment and aggressiveness of the company. Again, I'm no longer with GSN, but they operated their company in sort of a very different model. They were really geared around profitability. They were owned, not necessarily owned by Sony Pictures, but essentially they had a TV arm, and they had a games business. And they were very focused on profitability. So in terms of how they invested and how aggressive they were with their acquisition spend, I think limited some of their growth. But at the end of the day, it's when you have juggernauts that are in the business that can invest a significant amount of money in both product development and user acquisition, you either need to be smarter or you need to kind of get into the arms race if you ultimately want to compete.
Okay, so you all seem to be saying new, different, better games still have an opportunity. So let's talk a little bit about that. We can start with Niko and work our way down. What sort of innovation or differences in games in the social casino space would, of course you don't want to give away your great secret idea, I know, but try to give us some insight into, if you're trying to make a new game in the social casino space, what kind of innovations are we looking at? What kind of things would drive a new game, despite the fact that poker, slots, bingo are all pretty standard in terms of their rules?
Again, I'm going to come at this from a more slot-centric perspective, just given that that was kind of my most recent experience with Rocket. But we used to talk at Rocket about flavors of slots. Again, players are looking for lots of different types of gameplay, different volatility, different design aesthetic. And a lot of the time, it's driven by kind of regional preferences from what they see in the real-life casinos. So North America being one, of course. Australia is a huge slots market. I don't know if it's still the case, but Heart of Vegas, which was the Product Madness Aristocrat top-grossing game, was literally the #1 grossing app in the App Store in Australia. And it's quite popular in the US too, but different types of gameplay aren't necessarily going to translate from region to region. So what you need to do when you're developing a new product or trying to differentiate in the marketplace, and this is what you've seen over the last few years, is a lot of the innovation has come around. It's funny to call it innovation, but a lot of the innovation has come around replicating quite closely what is popular in the actual casinos. So using the Rocket Games example, before we launched Viva Slots Vegas, which was our flagship game, nobody had really done a classic mechanical three-reel style slots experience on mobile. And so we were pretty much the first to do it, certainly with a performant title. And what we found was there was an audience that was hungry for this kind of content that literally sought us out. It wasn't, yes, we were doing UA and we were kind of unlocking pretty healthy LTVs in terms of the users that we were acquiring, but we were sought out almost by word of mouth because people had been hungry for this kind of content and hadn't had it on mobile up until this point. You'll see the same kind of thing, and sorry I'm taking so much time here, but you'll see the same kind of thing here with Huge Casino. Most recently, they've gone after a social experience and gone after a more male audience. And mixing in other types of gameplay, not just slots. Very similar to Big Fish, but just taking a fresh look at that. That's done very well for them. So you have kind of incumbents from the land-based casino world who are bringing real-life content with actual titles, actual odds, actual volatility that you would see in the casinos, and not just kind of social versions of it, and that resonates with a certain type of player base. So there's a lot of reasons why something works and why something doesn't work, but really what it boils down to is player preferences and the voracious appetite for content. We used to call slots players promiscuous, just because they played so many different games at the same time.
So the innovation was actually in understanding the deeper desires of the particular players, because even today, I think any social casino that actually puts forth a good three-reel machine finds that almost all slots players love those games. I think before anybody creates a game, they have to understand their true capabilities, their motivations. As you were saying, GSN is profit motivated, or was at the time, and those motivations will lead you to do certain things over other things. So as an example, if profit is your main guidepost, creating a real-time multiplayer tournament type game is probably not the right way to go, because working out the kinks with that type of technology at scale is extremely difficult, time-consuming, and costly. So a lot of it is going to be what is your funding? Do you already have a network of players that you can drive to the game? And then doing what hopefully we all do now, which is look at the analytics, look at what the audience is actually playing in real casinos, and trying to kind of give them something that they will actually enjoy.
As long as you mentioned analytics, why don't you give the room some sense of what some of the key metrics are?
Want me to do it? That'd
be fine. I think all four of you are fully qualified to talk about conversion and some of the other metrics.
Again, everything goes into context. A lot of times when we were starting out, we would say, okay, first you're looking at retention, and then monetization, and then virality, and that kind of each of those leads to specific metrics. And when you're talking about retention, you're talking about day 1, day 7, day 30. Some people look at day 3. Other people, and I can throw numbers out there. If you have a game that is not in the 45 to 50% day 1, you're going to have a hard time ultimately succeeding. And hopefully, that 30%, 20%, day 7, day 30. In terms of, you can look at ARPDAUs, average revenue per daily active user. A lot of companies use that as their core metric, and you'll find that if you don't hit 15 cents, 20 cents, depending on where you are, you're going to have a hard time actually, even buying any players. But some companies are successfully hitting 40, 50, even 60-cent ARPDAUs. So there are, kind of other metrics, so DAUs, MAUs. I don't know what kind of drives a particular company. For us, we tend to look at retention numbers, but more at day 30 than day 1 and day 7. And
What's a good day 30 number?
well, a great day 30 number would be 20%. If you can,
Almost going to close it down would be what?
would be, anything in the single digits. Yeah.
I mean, the one thing I would say, it's an arbitrage game, right? Because essentially, you need to look at your LTV and you need to look at your CPI. And you need to have some really, really smart people who are calculating your LTV, and you need to have a lot of data to understand and validate that LTV. But that's really what it comes down to. Yeah, sorry, lifetime value for the 2 people that raised their hand early. So I mean, from my perspective, it really kind of boils down to that, and that's not necessarily exclusive to social casino, but that is really kind of the name of the game, and a lot of it really is driven by the high cost per installs that you're seeing in the social casino space, because it is so competitive, because it is so lucrative. If you can bring in some high value players, you can find yourself in a situation where you have a very lucrative business.
There's no way we're not going to spend some time on CPI. Game innovation? Tell us your best innovation that no one ever made.
I mean, they're doing it now, which I'm really, really happy to see, not necessarily at GSN, but you're seeing it out in the marketplace, which is the introduction of social. I mean, it always really pissed me off that it's called social casino and there's really no social aspect to the game. But you're really starting to see sort of the emergent elements of what I refer to as passive social. If you look at sort of the analog in the casino space, you see people who are sitting around slot machines in particular, and they're playing, but they're aware of what's going on around them. They're taking in all of the bells and the whistles and the jackpots that are happening around them, and that's important input to that person. It in some ways kind of provides a level of validation that they're making this investment, and sooner or later it's going to pay off, because essentially all the people around them are periodically hitting jackpots. And so we're starting to see the introduction of passive social into a lot of these, not into a lot, but into a handful of games. And I think that social is really an undervalued component, because at the end of the day, if you can get somebody who becomes invested at a social level, it has all kind of amplification effects to all the other systems that you have built into your product. And so I'm particularly excited about that. But I believe that in order to really differentiate yourself in the space, you have to first and foremost have great content, but it's the metagame around those core slot machines, bingo games, all of those elements that provide a level of stickiness and longevity to the players. Because you're paying so much to acquire them, you have to be in a position where you can retain them for a long enough period that you can get payback.
Is the metagame primarily long-term progression?
I mean, it's long-term progression. We're starting to see folks introduce the concept of collection, which I think is another powerful engagement system and retention system.
But tell us about that. I don't know what collection
Well,
is.
I mean, collection, 100 years ago when I was at Pogo, we did badges, right? And badges were this, Essentially, you complete a quest and you get something that you put in your book, and you have a whole bunch of slots for all of your little badges. So we're certainly seeing those kinds of mechanics appear to complement sort of the progression and unlock, and also some of the social components. And I think more and more of that is going to be necessary in order to retain these people long term.
I think this metagame thing is really important, and we saw it. I worked a lot with Pogo. We saw it when we had points that you earned if you played and/or won, and you could turn those points in for lotteries, right? So you turn in 5,000 points and you get a spin at the $50 lottery, and they were giving $50 away, numerous times a day and whatnot. And we found a lot of people, remember, that were never using their points for lottery. And when we went and talked to them about it, what we found out, in our words, was they had turned these points into the metagame. They had created a metagame because we hadn't.
Yeah.
So I think for those of you that are looking to develop both individual games and a suite of games, this is super actionable comment by Andrew. Other comments on analytics? I kind of skipped past half of you on the analytics or key metrics. Is Social Casino routinely got a higher conversion to pay than the more casual, strategy games, farms? I mean, at one time I was told that, many years ago, that blank company poker was always like 4% conversion, and that their biggest game, which was not Social Casino, was like 2% conversion. Those numbers still hold up? Is the relative numbers hold up?
I think in general terms, yes, it does. I think in slots, social casino slots, you're typically seeing a good game will convert anywhere between 4 and 6%. I think 6 is probably the best in class. Maybe it's a little higher these days. And your casual titles, I don't know if this still holds true, but I think Candy Crush Saga was like 1.5% conversion, give or take. So you're talking a factor of 3 to 4x better payer conversion in casino, in particular slots, which converts the best, than you are in the very casual titles. Ballpark.
Does it cost more to acquire a social casino player than it does a simple strategy player like Candy Crush or Farmville?
Well, I think it's going to be expensive regardless, right? Even for startups and like industry.
I'm sorry, repeat that sentence. That's an important sentence. It's going to be expensive regardless.
It's going to be expensive regardless, either whether you're a startup or if you're an industry vet, right? Because we're funneling through the same players in the same ecosystem. We're just whatever's the next wave we're going to be interested in. So yeah, in a nutshell, it's just going to be expensive, unless your organic installs are outstanding. You're still going to pay to retain the users.
Just go ahead, Niko.
I was going to say, I don't disagree with that, but I do think so certain games have very niche audiences. And if you have a very niche audience, you are either casting a very wide net to try and find these very niche players, or you have incredible targeting, in which case you are paying a huge amount. The smaller your target, typically the higher your cost per install. The broader your net, and the less you care about being selective about that particular niche audience, the less it's going to cost, because you're typically going to appeal to a broader audience. Your CPI is essentially a function of the cost to, so you put out, I'm going to use Facebook as an example. You put out your ad on Facebook. A certain number of people are going to see that. A certain number of people are going to click on that, and a certain number of people are then going to kind of convert into a player and then hopefully ultimately a payer. And every step of that funnel, you're going to lose some people. So if you're going to show a slots ad to a Candy Crush Saga player who doesn't care about slots, they're not even going to click on that. So you're wasting your impression on that person, and you're likely paying for that through Facebook. You can pay per click, but typically you're paying per impression. Whereas on the flip side, if you're showing a Candy Crush Saga ad, that has a much larger player base globally, and so you're going to have a much higher click-through rate on that ad. Now, on the flip side, you're not going to get as much payer conversion down the line. So those are the trade-offs that you typically see with kind of mass appeal, cheaper on a per-click basis, but ultimately you may be wasting your money more than you would on an expensive ad for a slots player because your monetization is less effective for that casual title.
Okay, sticking to the innovation question first. Hey, by the way, how are we doing out there? How many questions do we have now? Okay, good. We're going to do that. We're going to do that. It'll rise. You mark my word. It'll be at 5 to 4. It'll be 3. It'll be 5 people with their hands raised. So let's stick just to the innovation question for 1 second, then go to the audience. Match 3, strategy. These games are pretty fluid as to what they are, and there aren't these. There isn't this true world analogy like there is in casino. How innovative can you be in social casino? How much of the rules can you change? Or do you really have to stick to, this is how bingo's played, this is how slots is played, this is how poker's played?
I think part of it depends upon how much time and effort you want to spend on education. So, we can obviously play with the rules in social casino that you can't do in the real world. So, as an example, I think virtually every successful social casino changes the math, let's put it politically correctly, changes the math of that involve the first 50 to 100 spins of a slot machine to ensure that a player gets to experience, because the difference is on a casino floor, you have 30 minutes to an hour to engage that player. In an app, I don't know how you guys feel, but we kind of view this as we have 30 seconds to buy the next 30 seconds, to buy the next 30 seconds, to buy the next 30 seconds. And so we want to make sure that within that first 30 seconds, a player actually experiences a great time. And so you can call it innovation, we call it survival, is just ensuring that a player will experience various big wins as well as a bonus game within the first 30 seconds to 1 minute of play. We also innovate in other ways. So there are social features. How do you get players to actually know how to use those social features? You can use bots to let them know how to use those social features. So, how far you want to go. Now, that doesn't mean we ever change the odds, like the fundamental gameplay. So once a player gets into that, we never can cross the line where players actually think that the game itself can cheat or change the odds on a day-to-day basis. That we don't ever do. And yet players believe that we do that constantly. So that's just a couple of examples.
From my experience, we did a lot of original, speaking mostly around slots. We did a lot of original slot creation at GSN, and I think the more you move away from what I classify sort of the traditional experience, ultimately the less compelling the game was. It's not to say that there aren't exceptions to that. I think that there's pre-existing expectations of the audience that they're going to get a certain kind of experience. And there's some latitude in terms of what you can do there, particularly if you're using IP and there's expectations around that IP. But I think the innovation in my mind is really around sort of the metagame or the wrapper experience, but it has to be something that is secondary to playing the slot. That it can't get in the way. It needs to be a supporting player. And I think over time what happens is it becomes a much more compelling aspect, and will keep the player in that experience. You're still going to be on that content treadmill where you're going to have to be pumping out more and more content over time. But that metagame sort of is one of these things that just continues to pay dividends over time because the player gets more invested in their progression, they get more invested in their collection, their social status starts increasing, and that kind of generates a lot of friction to switching to another game. So, my expectation is over time you're going to see more innovation on the metagame than you are on the actual slots. Or the casino game itself. Yeah.
Is anybody doing something like a bunch of us, I'm sure, were at CES, and I had the pleasure of staying at New York, and they have their M Life Club, Is anything like that? So you get, free drinks, free dinner,
Yeah.
free sweets, and they hit the slots people with these freebies much better than the card game guys. Is there anything like that? Is there a players club that gives you?
Yeah, I mean, there's loyalty programs, but in particular, My Vegas was the one who kind of pioneered this, and they've been incredibly successful at it. And I think that they're sort of in a unique position because of their relationship to have access to all of these different kinds of perks or rewards that they can give to their players. We were approaching a very large, prominent, but independent casino around developing a product for them and really wanted to do a rewards program. And I think that there's a big resistance, or at least they demonstrated a big resistance to doing a rewards program, partly because within sort of the casino, land-based casino industry, I think that there's really a bad taste in the mouth relating to the actual implementation and fulfillment of all of these perks or rewards that are being paid to the player. And consequently, I think there's a resistance to that. And I think at the end of the day, casino owners are cheap and they watch every penny, and they don't want to give away something unless they know that individual is going to pay back double over time by coming into the casino, gambling, and losing lots of money. So I think that, I'm not going to say that that's an exception, but I think that that has been something that has been very successful, but I think it's hard to replicate for other companies unless they have one of these kinds of, I don't want to say exclusive relationships, but very valuable relationships.
Yeah, I think what's interesting with, if you guys have played Heart of Vegas, is that it's a straight up slot machine game. I mean, there's no progression, there's nothing. I mean, you can level up, but that's ubiquitous, right, throughout the slot machine world. So what we do to fight fatigue is essentially through live ops. And it's really customized for each player. So that with all the data that we have, we can hyper-target one player to just play a little bit more. Here's a little bit more coins, right? Or you ran out of coins and just give them the right deal. So really lengthen their gameplay through just the experience of advertising, in-game advertising.
So we do have a rewards program with our parent company, and it is basically our metagame, and it is extremely successful simply because, like My Vegas, it's authentic to the experience. So people are coming to a social casino game, they're playing the same casino games that they're seeing on the floor, and then they can go to the resort and they can get meals in the restaurants they're used to, they can get rooms, they can...
So they're out of the game.
Exactly.
Loyalty benefits. But we're never going to have a cocktail waiter or waitress. You see how politically correct I am? I don't think I've ever seen a cocktail waiter. But we're never going to get cocktail waitresses, are we? At our slot machines at home.
Maybe not at home, but we'll try and, maybe holographically.
Hey guys, one thing that, having done this for a while now, there's a lot of money spent on UA and even more money spent on people like me. At what point in time in the process of growing an organization, growing a product, do you stop saying, let's stop collecting bodies to do UA in-house and you start looking at agencies? Because I find more than ever now, I'm walking away from things or integrating agencies to handle these types of things because they have a lot more tools than I do. We've got some great ones that are here. Bidalgo is a fantastic one. I'm totally name dropping. John, you in here? All right. So, I use Yellowhead as an example as my agency. Who are you guys using? At what point in time do you make that switch? When does it make sense to say, hey, look, you know what? These guys have more tools than we do. And who are you using? And you should ask for a percentage off next month on your billing as soon as you say their name.
So I can start on that one. So we did both. We had both. So at Rocket, we had both in-house, and we used a bunch of different agencies. And we used Bidalgo at one point. We used Matomi. We tried a whole bunch. One of the things. So the short answer is, if you can do it well in-house, do it in-house. You have much better visibility into your spend. I'm not trying to rag on any agency here, by the way, because we enjoyed working with Bidalgo greatly, and John's a good guy. But if you can do it in-house, and This is the key part, and your budget justifies it. What you really going to think about is, okay, how many people does it take to support a UA team? What is that going to cost you per year? And then what is the delta between what you're spending with an agency at scale, because they take a percentage on top of the spend that you're spending there. We tended to find that we could spend, when we focused on it, as effectively as an agency. Granted, we had to have extra employees, but we could do it as effectively once we were at a certain scale. I think when you're at a small scale, and you're not going to want to spend $150 plus $1,000 a year on your UA manager, and then 2 buyers and creative artists and things like that to create all the assets. That's the point where it makes sense to go with an agency, even though they charge more because of the percentage extra and it's going to be different by agency. So that was our experience. We went from agency to ourselves, hired 2 guys, and then had a kind of a creative asset creation team once we were, I think it was like $500,000 a month or something like that when we were spending. So that was our experience, but I think it's going to depend on each organization. It depends on what you think your core competencies are. So I think the core point you're making is, if your core competency is making great slots content and slots games, why not outsource the buying? I think it absolutely makes perfect sense. If you're profit motivated, I think one of the panelists here said here is, if you really focus on your profit and you think you can do a better job than the agency once you're at a certain scale, then you should, because then you're serving the business needs in addition to the core competency, tough thing to say, core competency of slots content.
Any other agencies you want to mention on the pro side? I mean, it's a good question, right? They want some useful, actionable information.
We very much like Bidalgo. Not that I want to single them out necessarily, but they really have, they started by focusing on social casino, and that's really kind of, yes, they broadened scope since then, but they were very knowledgeable about all of social casino. They were really knowledgeable about the comps, and therefore were able to do a good job for us in terms of just benchmarking everything. Matomi was good too, by the way.
Other comments on agencies?
The one thing that I would say is, if you are going to use an agency, the first thing you need to worry about is fraud. And so, it is a huge problem whenever you're buying away from Facebook. So AppsFlyer, just to do a shout out, has a new product that we're using successfully to look at what percentage of the traffic actually was fraudulent, and then go back to the agency and say, all right, you need to reimburse us for this 20%, this 30%. You'll find on Android, fraud can account for as much as 40% of traffic or more. So you really need to be careful. And I totally agree that when you're small, you tend to use agencies more. As you grow, you tend to bring some of that in-house, although that kind of right mix is a great thing to have.
I agree with what the gentlemen have said. The one thing I would say is that if you want to be successful in the social casino space, UA is a core competency. You cannot just be a great developer. You have to be a great marketer and acquirer of users if you want to be successful. And so I think, when you hit that certain scale point where it no longer makes sense to necessarily use an agency, there's going to be a big investment, but it is an important foundational component to your business. And one would argue, when you look at your P&L or your balance sheet, you're spending more on marketing than you probably are on development.
By the way, I just want to add tactically, I would say at least once a year, you ought to bring in outside agencies and let them pitch you. Maybe in your mind you'll never hire a single one of them, but that's the job they're in. They want to come to your office and pitch you. So take advantage of that and you'll learn stuff. We did it, you might remember years ago, Pogo, around guerrilla marketing. Yep. We had a bunch of agencies in, we no intention of hiring one, but we learned a lot about guerrilla marketing. But they all got a pitch. I mean, they got what they wanted. So I think there's a lot to be said for that.
You guys talked a lot about the UA, and I heard just a little bit about advertising is engagement tool, or what do you guys think about how is social casino moving to this more monetization through ads and not mainly by in-app purchases?
If I may. Rocket Games was bootstrapped. We never raised any funding, and we started out with video slots titles before we figured out that there was this market for classic-style mechanical three-wheel. And up until that point, we didn't have the LTVs to justify doing any paid user acquisition, and our IAP revenue was pretty pathetic, to be honest with you. We had good retention, but just very poor monetization. So almost all of our revenue came from advertising because we had to bootstrap somehow. And so we got not to brag too much here, but we got quite sophisticated around showing ads. We had a mediation layer, Google's AdMob, and we had about 4, 5, 6 different ad partners in there at any given time, and whoever was bidding highest would get the first impression, and so on and so forth. And we built a pretty decent business, about 20 million a year in revenues from just advertising and very little IAP. And what I would say is, absolutely, I think it's a great way to grow. And I think one of the big questions that we're asking here today is how do you succeed in 2018 in this crowded social casino space? I do think showing ads is a way to do it because paid UA is very expensive, which means somebody's paying crazy high CPIs, which means somebody's showing an ad somewhere that's earning that much money. Why not you as the developer? Now, I know some developers, Playtika in particular, have a aversion to showing ads because they don't want anybody to leave their game and go play a competitor's game because you're almost guaranteed to be seeing other slots game ads. We never had a problem with that just because our philosophy was, look, this player, whether they see it in our game or somewhere else, because they're so promiscuous, they're playing all these different slots games, they're going to see this ad anyway. So somebody's going to get paid for this. Might as well be us. So that was our philosophy, and I really do believe that that's one of the ways I think you could still, to this day, in 2018 in social casino, bootstrap and grow a business, a company, and not just a product. Now, I know people may disagree with that, and I know there was vehement disagreement in the industry around whether this was a sensible thing to do or not. People were telling us, you're crazy, you're sending all your best payers away. Well, we found that it wasn't really impacting our business, but others maintained that it had to be. So my 2 cents on that topic. But good question, I think.
But what percentage did it make up? Once you kind of got the IAP working, what percentage did ad make up of that mix?
So we flipped. It used to be 80-20, and it went to 20-80 once we got to a point. So IAP is still best, by the way. Don't get me wrong. It's way better because it's controllable. You can actually buy against it. You've got LTVs that justify high UA spend. So excellent point, point taken. But yeah, it is a way to get going out of the gates.
And you should try it. You don't have to rely on your intuition. I mean, the idea that if I show an ad to somebody, I'm going to drive them away from the game, that is not proven. Matter of fact, there's counter evidence to that in some cases. So, I mean, you guys have the great advantage of the industry you're in allows you to test it. So test it. No reason to have, an argument.
Sure. I'm just trying to understand what's changed in the industry via, I guess, Google changing the way they are selling their inventory through their UAC program rather than through the deeper insights you used to get when you bought through Google. And I understand Facebook is using an equivalent methodology now.
Yeah, from our perspective, not really that much has changed. Some of the tools change, but since it's so driven by literally price and cents and just by scale and territory, the tools are. There was a time probably 1 to 2 years ago where the tools enabled us to kind of in-house have to be able to compete with the agencies, I think, a lot more. But that time is now gone, and now we all seem to be paying crazy high prices through every tool.
And what are you paying? Are these 10 to 20? Is it up at 30 with Machine Zone and Supercell, or down in the single digit? Dollars?
For us, there is a massive difference by region. So U.S., Australia. For us, like U.S., Australia, Singapore is in the, I would say, $7 range on iOS and $5 range on Android. If we go to Hong Kong, much smaller territory, we're paying as much as $20 and up. And if you actually, even Android players are $15 and up, which there's no way you can, kind of make your money back at that level. So that's strictly a growth game. Yeah, it is, if your game is not viral, and I guess that's the one message I can get across. If you're building a new game today, make sure it's viral, because there's no way you can grow to scale by buying players today. It's just not possible in our minds.
And by the way, when people say to you, oh, I bought players at 50 cents or on particularly like a Facebook where we know the numbers, they're talking about they bought 200 players that week.
Exactly.
And these guys have all had to have the experience of buying what we call at scale, where you've had to buy hundreds of thousands of users a week or a month. And then the price skyrockets, right?
Exactly.
All right, let's wrap up by asking, probably a lot of you are aware that there's a large Supreme Court case, no pun intended, Chris Christie versus, I guess, the United States government or something like that, to try to declare unconstitutional the restrictions on online sports gambling. Broadly speaking, in the United States, where do each of you see online real money gambling going?
Well, where is it legal anywhere in the U.S. right now? Is it New Jersey or something like that?
Yeah.
I mean, if it's going to be across the board, across the United States, I mean, for companies, even for the small ones, I don't think they'll be able to compete, because just because you need deep pockets, right? You're going to have the aristocrats, the play because to actually compete in that space. So, I mean, would I like to see it? Yeah, absolutely.
So you're asking whether online gaming in general, online gambling in general, becomes legal across the U.S. or just state by state? What was the question?
No, I mean, what's the future of real money gambling online in the United States? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it going to happen? Is it going to break out big time?
We should probably talk to Melissa over there, because she has a much better.
Appreciate the questions. Great audience, panelists. I thought let's give a big applause to the audience.